we had a conversation over dinner the other night with my high school senior, and we were having this conversation about week to week, everything is changing so quickly in the AI space. And the implications of that are, I don't want to say severe, but they're very large and material. I don't know about you. We can get into it a little bit, but like my day-to-day workflow is completely changed. I use AI tools all day long for all kinds of different stuff. I was reading a 70-page document on technology product licensing today, and I threw it into like Google's NotebookLM, and it gives me a brief, and it does the have you seen the feature where you can like make an audio?
Oh, no, I haven't seen that. No.
It's like an AI generated podcast. It was a 17-minute podcast style conversation between two fake people, AI generated people, talking about this document and kind of teasing out what are the highlights that you need to know.
I have used a tool like that. I forget the name of it, but we have somebody on our staff at our church that sends us those, and they're crazy because they sound like real people, and it's helpful.
It's very helpful, but it's like, oh yeah, so that's a good point. And you know, there's all these verbal pauses.
Yeah, the verbal pauses are very off-putting when you realize it's not real. You're like, oh, they're mimicking human behavior.
Welcome to the Digital Ministry Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Runyon, and I'm here with a good friend, Jay Kranda. Jay, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get in. We got some fun topics to cover today.
I think so. I think we'll have a good time, or we'll expose ourselves as the fools that we are. So one or the other. Jay, like we chat all the time, kind of offline from this public conversation, of course, but I think, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's changing right now. Actually, this is a dilemma I have. My oldest is in college. He's a freshman. I got a kid going to college next year. I've got a sophomore in high school. So I'm going to be broke for like 10 years. But we had a conversation over dinner the other night with my high school senior, and we were having this conversation about week to week, everything is changing so quickly in the AI space. And the implications of that are, I don't want to say severe, but they're very large and material. I don't know about you. We can get into it a little bit, but like my day-to-day workflow is completely changed. I use AI tools all day long for all kinds of different stuff. I was reading a 70-page document on technology product licensing today, and I threw it into like Google's NotebookLM, and it gives me a brief, and it does the have you seen the feature where you can like make an audio?
Oh, no, I haven't seen that. No.
It's like an AI generated podcast. It was a 17-minute podcast style conversation between two fake people, AI generated people, talking about this document and kind of teasing out what are the highlights that you need to know.
I have used a tool like that. I forget the name of it, but we have somebody on our staff at our church that sends us those, and they're crazy because they sound like real people, and it's helpful.
It's very helpful, but it's like, oh yeah, so that's a good point. And you know, there's all these verbal pauses.
Yeah, the verbal pauses are very off-putting when you realize it's not real. You're like, oh, they're mimicking human behavior.
Right. So who knows? Maybe we can make this whole podcast just AI generated in the future, and you don't need to listen to me. But so the conversation with my kids is like, okay, 4 years from now, try to imagine what work is going to be like 4 years from now. So you're choosing a major as an incoming college freshman. How deeply do you need to think about, one, spending the money on this education, and two, like, is the major that I'm selecting even going to be valuable or viable 4 years from now? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because obviously, you know, I have a kid about to go into high school, and then and the two that are in elementary, and one's about to go into middle school, and so I kind of have a little younger in the stages, and it's interesting to watch even how, you know, still teachers and classrooms are kind of this anti, you know, I would say, using AI. And, you know, I remember about a year ago, I think my wife was sick, and they came to me for a question. Typically, they don't come for me for help for homework. Generally, my kids, and I said, "Well, why don't you just ask, ChatGPT or Gemini?" And they're like, "Dad, we can't do that." And I was like, "Why can't you do that? Like, I don't understand." And it's, well, we have to show the work and blah blah. And, well, you can do that, and
Yeah.
and it's this interesting approach where, again, I think generally when you introduce anything new, it's very easy to kind of say no to it. But I find it interesting that I hope schools, and there's some thinking that, hey, as an adult, I'm not, for example, writing out equations. I'm using these tools, and
Right.
we should use it like the tool we're going to use for the rest of our life. But I definitely feel I have the perspective generally, and I'm piggybacking off of others, but there's this idea of, like, white collar and blue collar types of jobs.
Right.
And there's a Mark Andreessen quote that's very famous, like, in the future, you will be told by computers what to do, or you will tell the computers what to do.
Hmm.
And I think that's generally going to still be true in the coming decades. But I think the idea is that you hope our kids understand their role. Like, I hope my kids and myself, I understand what's the value of my work. The value of my work is not pushing the buttons, keeping the seat warm. My value
Right.
of the work is solving the problem. And the question is there either, will technology and AI, for example, will it just increase our productivity by 25%, or will it rewrite all of our jobs? I think that's the tension of the degree of difference, because you can look back at the last 20 years and it's very different. The types of jobs that exist now. The idea
Oh,
is
for
that I
sure.
can do so much of my work from home, while still needing to be in the office, but it's just different. I don't need to be as much. And so I think I've had a lot of conversations with my kids around that. Like, I want you to know, like, for example, you need to know how to type. You need to know how to problem solve around some of these things. I want you to be using Gemini, Perplexity, ChatGPT. I want you to be aware of this, but I definitely think school is going to be important still. But the question, to your point, is like, what degree is an interesting question, because I don't know. I don't use a lot of my degree stuff day to day, anyways. I don't know about you, but I'm curious. Do you push back on some of those thoughts as I kind of framed it, or are you kind of align?
I think you framed it correctly. I have a hard time imagining which degrees align with which jobs over the next 4 years. I
Yeah.
think that's my problem. Because, like, I was on a trip last year and we had these college kids with us, and they were asking me, they're like, "Oh, hey, we had lunch together," and they're like, "Man, you've done like a bunch of stuff. And like, if you were me, what would you go into school to do?" And I was like, honestly, I said, the reason I was a business major, I was like business systems, computer science and business together. It's like, the reason I did that is because I couldn't hack it as an engineer. Like, I really wanted to be an engineer. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
like the math just buried me. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not smart enough to do this. And kind of my advice to them was like, if you can specialize, and especially if that specialization leads to like a high grossing job, like a doctor or a lawyer or something, I was like, you should do that. I was like, I went into business because I felt like I couldn't do any of those things. Maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough or whatever, but it's much more general. The advantage to like a business degree, and this is what my son is enrolled as a business major. I think that I think you're going to share this experience. Like, if you want to be, your quote about like being told what to do or telling the computer what to do, it's really interesting, because I think that that's true. Like, it's either entrepreneur versus
Yeah. It's
employee.
true.
It's like, I'm either going to kind of hack something together and figure out a way to make a living, and use some of these core principles that I learned, through a business degree, and figure out how to go apply them. That might be running a lawn care company, which I'm kind of in love with landscape and lawn care companies and like local service businesses right now.
Yeah.
Or if I'm trying to go find a job in an office where you'll just hire me to do some kind of business thing, I think those get overrun immediately.
Mhm.
Because your 25% productivity comment,
Yep.
I've seen that in the last 6 months. Like, my productivity is way up. Like, I can crank out so much more product or output day to day using some of these tools, and using all of them, like just exploring all of them, than I ever could before. So with a kid graduating with a, you know, tens of thousands of dollars price tag on a degree that's general, like business. Like I'm having a real conversation with my son right now saying like, I don't know. Like, what are you willing to do with that? Like, what links are you willing to go to try to monetize that degree in the future when you get out with it, based on what we see happening right now today? Like, it's some tough choices. And then throughout that conversation, my other son was like, he goes, I was thinking about this the other day, and he goes, I was thinking about like, what are the real people focused, relationship focused types of jobs? So like doctors with bedside manner, maybe even lawyers with like empathy and guidance. Like law is just the application of written, you know, precedents basically that's captured in law. That's perfect for AI. But is there still a human element that's going to be needed, to
Yep.
engage with people about contract law or whatever the case may be? Maybe. But another one that he mentioned was pastors. He was like, pastoral care is incredibly relational, and like, I don't think that ever gets replaced by a machine. So, and anyway, interesting conversations. I agree
Yeah.
with you on teachers not allowing it. I think we should open up
Well,
those.
and it's I was listening to somebody talk about this at some point the last couple of months, and they kind of were alluding to the fact we kind of referenced that tool of summarizing meetings. If you think about like sports radio, for example, or sports podcasts, there's two types of things. There's like the ESPN, like here are the facts, and then there's the take. And the argument is, I think AI can summarize, for example, like I can go into AI and go like, who won the World Series in 1987?
Sure.
And maybe there are analysts, for example, at an ESPN company that are going to be less needed, like data analysts in the future,
Mm-hmm.
because before you would have to keep all the archives and you would have to, index it. There might be less need of that. But to think like there are people I listen to because of their take, and that's very human. Like the way they analyze the data and spit it back out, so to say. I don't think AI is going to be able to replicate those takes. And so, like, one of the other counters is, yeah, you can go down a very specialty route, which, again, if you're motivated and you're excited to be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever, that's important. But the other thing is, like, I think a lot of my job, for example, I find myself pulled between technical realm and pastoral realms. And I
Okay.
kind of like, and really what I do for the orgs that I engage with is I translate both of those spaces to each other. And so it's almost like I am not an engineer, I'm not a back end developer or even a front end developer, but I can bridge those worlds. And so I have enough awareness, and then I in my human consciousness translate those into something that's helpful. And so it's almost like, again, it's that blue collar work versus white collar work. Are you actually solving problems, or are you just pushing buttons? Because if
Right.
you're pushing buttons, there's a chance that percentage of your work over the next 10-15 years will be gobbled up into some kind of it's the same thing with, like, you think about this with it's the story with the Tesla factories of wanting to go full AI, I mean, not AI, but like robotic AI type of activity. And then they realize that they need still humans on the ground. And so it's this hybrid. And so, like, you still need somebody real time, because I think, I personally, I know we might disagree on this. I think the like the fully conscious type of, they call it generative type of AI work, where like they're solving problems like across devices versus like application specific. I
Yeah.
think the generative AI stuff is actually going to be really hard to crack. And I think it's not that it's not going to happen. I think what we think it might be more like flying car promises. And so I think that there'll be versions of it. But again, we look at Apple intelligence is not this super helpful thing. I think people don't
It's
realize how
terrible.
hard this is. And so I think there's more need for humans in the future, but I do think people shouldn't bank on, I'm like, your expertise should be solved, like actually critical thinking more. And I think that's that gap. I actually think AI will push. Like, I think about this. If I was born in a different era, my efficiency as like a farmer isn't as good as my efficiency with a phone. And I know how to like, I'm able to be way more productive and valuable to an org because I have the internet, and I'm able, based off of like my wiring.
Yeah.
If I was born in a different age, I don't think I would have been as efficient. And so it's
Well,
that tension.
You would have learned to be, or you would have starved,
I
probably.
mean,
But
yeah, hypothetically, you would assume, but I also think that like I'm very good with the internet and technology, and I've been able to figure that out.
and so I actually do agree with that. I just don't think you're going to need 100 people. I think you need one. And
Mm,
so, like, it might be a job scarcity issue that we run into. So here's a quote I saw today that you just what you were saying reminded me of this. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for
yeah,
knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution.
that's a great quote.
You want to take a guess on who said that?
Steve Jobs. I don't even know.
Einstein. So
Oh, that was my second guess.
Albert Einstein. It's a good guess, though, given the imagination heaviness of that quote. But the line, imagination embraces the entire world, that could be imagination is rooted in your collective experience. And AI might surprise us and get really imaginative, like looking at stuff from different angles. So,
Well, and really, AI is typically iterative. It will take an idea and it can spin out 5 other ideas. The question is, can it come up with the original idea? And I
or
think
can it
that
generate original idea?
can it generate? And I think that I, you know, and we can get theological, but I think this is where people are underplaying, or at least in the tech space, or let's say in the general like zeitgeist of this conversation. I think people don't believe. A lot of people don't believe in the idea that I the difference between I think us and the animals are the idea that we have the spirit of God. Like, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's that I believe that, and so like I think to think that we're just going to have this conscious thing that is going to come up with ideas and solve problems. I still think we're going to have to tell it, and I think it will get more efficient at these things. But I think that jump now, this is where I think we are guessing about the future. And I know somebody listening is like, I'm just a ministry leader, and this you're overwhelming me with these thoughts. But I think these are the conversations, and it's going to be fun to figure it out.
Well, for the ministry leader listening or watching, I would say you can't replicate, flesh on flesh, that human interaction. People want to be known, they want to be connected with. And I think that becomes incredibly even more valuable in the future. And I think we've already seen that even since COVID with like some of the disconnectedness and loneliness that
Yep.
people are, that's another conversation for another podcast probably. But my kids were theorizing the other day about their classmates and even themselves to some extent, like don't know how to just engage in a normal conversation because they had like a 2-year, foundational years, 2 years were robbed
Yeah.
from them of that experience. So, okay. So to continue down the AI path a little bit, like one thing you and I were talking about before we hit record was the big news this week is with DeepSeek,
Yeah.
DeepSeek AI coming out of China. So OpenAI has been, I'm going to attempt to give like a little landscape here and you tell me if this is right or not. But OpenAI, despite the name, it's closed.
I
It's
know.
it's closed source code. Can't you can build some custom GPTs and things on it. I've been using it a ton. I've got the pro version, and right now I think that it's still worth it. Although I'm finding some limitations that annoy me about paying $200 a month for it. But incredibly expensive. Nvidia has been like this huge takeoff. They've been around forever. I mean, 20 years or something, but their stock has gone crazy because they make these GPUs that were in high demand and they can't fill the supply and they're charging a lot for them. They use a ton of energy, so this starts to impact like all these different sectors. But the Nvidia stock price dipped. I mean, they shed billions of dollars this
Yeah.
week in their
Huge dip.
value with the introduction of DeepSeek, because the story out of DeepSeek was we figured out how to do this without access to these high processing GPUs. We did it cheaper and we trained the model in a more effective but a more efficient way. And I'm not sure if I believe it. I'm not sure if I believe the PR.
Well, it is clear that there was this group that funded DeepSeek. They were like a think tank in China prior, and they had bought a bunch of these chips. And so I think the hard part to somebody listening to this is that there's also this like meta layer going on of like politics and international law around China. Like the US has this huge lead with AI, and everything that touches the internet has a computer technology needs a chip. And we have the best chips, or have control of the best chips, and so they put some international law where China couldn't get access to certain chips. And now this is where the tension is they thought the US had this 3 to 5 year jump on this, and now DeepSeek was able to create something around. A lot of people think that they actually bought a lot of these prior to the law went into effect, and so now there's a lot of rumors, and we were talking about this, that people don't really know. But it is crazy that this came out, and it, like, the stock market in the US just takes this huge hit, and it's because the stock market is a bet on the future, and
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
now it takes a hit. But it's an interesting play. And so I guess from your perspective, what do you think it actually means to the average ministry leader that this is? Why is DeepSeek important from your perspective?
I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things, and it depends on probably what you think, or maybe what the people you're ministering to think and how they view this. There is a group of people, and I'm hearing more and more. I mean, you and I both listen to a ton of podcasts, a bunch of news, and all this stuff. And people are saying things that sound a lot like this John Carr book that I read earlier last fall called Red Sky Morning. It's the same guy that wrote Terminal List, which is, a series on Amazon. And in that book, there's an AI that was developed by the US government in order to kind of respond automatically to the threat of nuclear war. So it's basically the AI speeds the decision-making cycle and does whatever it needs to do in order to protect, the US in case of a nuclear attack. There's people that are kind of talking that way, and they're saying things like the race to build and monopolize, or like own, the best AI is really correlated with our national security and kind of the future prosperity and a lot of like doomsday kind of stuff. And so the reason why I mentioned that kind of it matters what the people you're ministering to are thinking about, because that can create a ton of anxiety, worry, concern, and a lot of what typically would tend to be pretty negative reactions. If people are looking at it like, oh, this is the end of the world, that's one side of it. The other side is that I think, even if it's not kind of going down the doomsday path, and so people aren't kind of zeroing in on that, it's getting really, really hard to kind of test authenticity and the validity of some of the content and the information that's coming at us every day. And so that's shaping people's opinions. It's shaping people's worldview. It's shaping people's kind of reasoning and values, And there's extreme examples there too that we could explore. But as all of these things kind of ratchet up, OpenAI, Grok, Gemini from Google, DeepSeek, like the race is on. That is clear. Yeah. And I feel a little bit like a guinea pig. It's like, this is real world testing on a live audience. And I don't know if we can accurately predict or anticipate what the implications are going to be. But the people that we're trying to connect with are wrestling with those same anxieties and questions as well.
It's interesting how you frame that, because I think that is definitely, like, I joke a lot with my friends about this, because I have a couple of friends that are really like health nuts. And that's a very, like, that's something like, you just watch one TikTok video and now you have this opinion.
It's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah. And I have a friend who I love dearly, and has gone through some health things and kind of blames it on some things related to some of these meta conversations. And I have kind of jokingly said, I'm not saying I disagree or agree. I'm just saying, like, I just don't know if plastics in this is killing me. I just don't know, because there's so many things. And I think, to your point, the ministry leader has to understand this DeepSeek thing reacted because of this, like, cycle we live on, and everybody panicked. And I think it does show this idea that, because the way social media is and the way news stories are kind of decentralized, that we have people both in two camps. We have people that are diehards, believe everything they read, and we have people that are super skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when you present the gospel, for example, I think we have to understand that there are a lot of people searching and open to the truth. And then there's a lot of people that just, they saw one TikTok video, one YouTube video, and they totally think you're dumb. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we have to learn how to engage in this environment. This is why I think sometimes I feel like it's really helpful, especially in online conversations, not to come off as arrogant. I mean, not that we purposely do this, but I think there is a tactic like just share the gospel and that's it. But I think you get a lot of ground online to say, like, have you ever thought about this? Or have you seen this? And ask a lot of questions. You know, you used to call this in like apologetic realms, like the Columbo thing. You kind of question them to death. And I
Have
think
you ever watched Columbo? Like, you're young.
I've seen clips. I've seen
It's
clips.
an old show.
It is the guy who referenced it, Greg, is it Kokel? He's like a popular evangelist. He's the one that kind of I know this from. But I think it's like we were talking about this, like this really interesting dynamic happening on one of the most popular podcasts on the internet right now, online, Joe Rogan. There's
Yeah.
all these faith conversations, and really, regardless of what you think of Joe Rogan is a normal dude just asking questions. He literally, like, he would be like a guy you would just run in at a party and he would just start talking about anything. And he doesn't think he's being recorded and millions of people are listening, but they're talking about Jesus on this podcast. And it goes, wow, what world are we in? The populist conversation now, like just about a couple of years ago, it was kind of very negative to be a Christian. And
Yeah.
now there's this conversation, but I think it's because people are looking for truth. And I don't think there's clarity of what truth is. And that means we have an opportunity to engage people because people are searching and walking into our churches and our ministry, asking questions. And we have to be ready to engage that in a very strategic way.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I wonder if the lack of transparency with some of the content, and then all of this stuff about AI kind of taking over the world, it prompts, questions of meaning, like what's the point? If I'm concerned about not having a job when I get out of college, like what's even the point of life? Like how do I anticipate even 4 years down the road how I'm going to like support myself and raise a family and do all, whatever I want to do? What does existence even mean? Yeah, I wonder if maybe that's where some of these questions are coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I was watching a show. I just watched a show on Apple Plus, and it was very depressing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Severance.
it wasn't Severance. I have been watching that, but the Severance is definitely depressing too. But
I only saw the pilot. But.
It's just Lost. This is all it is. And so the
Lost with a good ending.
With a good, we don't know. It's the problem. And so the thing that I realized is this idea that, like, I'm a pastor at a church. I have a deep faith. I am very grounded in my belief in God, in my experience with God. But I got at the end of this show, and I was just sad about just thinking about this world this show is like portraying as a possibility in the future. It's kind of alluding to nuclear war. And one of the things that was kind of hitting me is this idea that as a, like, a terrible phrase, but a religious leader, let's just call me that, in my community.
Sure.
I was having doubts about potential future. And one of the things that I think we can do in the transparency and authenticity is that I think sometimes leaders present themselves like they have it all together. And I think what we can do in some of these spaces is to talk about some of the things that, like, sometimes when we doubt things or things we have questions about. And I think the era of acting like you're the expert and you know it all, potentially in an internet age when we can't know it all, has to kind of come to an end, and more come to it like, this is what I believe, this is what I know, but here's some things I'm asking. And I think the people that do really well online ask questions. That's what Joe Rogan does. He doesn't act like he's the expert. I mean, I actually get really annoyed when people attack him to act like he's an expert. He's the complete opposite. He's very knowledgeable on things, but he doesn't act like he's a doctor or whatever. He just, like, this is what I'm thinking. And it's like pointing out things that just don't make sense. And then when he's correct, he's corrected. And I think, and this would be my encouragement to a pastor, a ministry leader, you have doubts about things and have questions about things. And we need to engage people walking into our ministry and our churches very authentic. Like, hey, like if you have doubts and they have doubts, and those are probably the doubts you have or the questions you have are great bridge points to connect with them on a human level. And now you're going to have more clarity on these things, but it's connect with them. And I just, it's this idea that like, I know it, come to me, this is the answer. But like, hey, like people don't want, they want to know that you have more answers, but they also want to know like you're human. And I think that's where these, I don't think it's crazy that these people that ask a lot of questions, they're so popular because they're very normal, you know? And I think there's a learning there for us, especially in that meta level of the people that they're most popular. Because really, if I think about the podcasts I like listening to, yeah, they're very brilliant and smart, but they're very human and they're raw. And that's what I like about them, because when I hear them
Raw
make a
how?
mistake,
Like, what's that mean?
well, what I mean by raw is that they're very they show their faults or when they're wrong.
Okay.
Like, and so it's not a it's not a I know it all. It's like, oh, I was wrong on that. Or like it would be here in the political cycle, like people I follow, like I totally got that wrong. I didn't think Trump was gonna win, you know. And you're like, you more relate to when somebody confesses, you know, you kind of like, oh. And so I think it's this, it's that, I think to that point, and we've been hearing this for, I think 5 years, that people want people who are authentic. And I think we got to be authentic as ministries about some of these things.
I think when you admit that you were wrong about something, it builds trust.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's especially when you get to faith conversations, like there's some deep things, like to be honest that, you know, I think about things that I've changed my mind on, the things that I've evolved on. Again, like I talk a lot, even this is something I think a lot, you probably do as well. Like I think a lot with my kids as they become older. I want it not to be my faith. I want it to be their faith.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
there are parts of the Bible that I've had to wrestle through in different seasons, and I have understanding, but I don't want them just, again, they're not a computer. Like I don't want them just to recite what I say. I think a lot about like when I die at one point, like I want them to really believe it. And you have to wrestle with it. And I don't think people realize that because of these conversations on Joe Rogan and all these things, people are wrestling through. And the question, are we able to actually engage them authentically? And it's not just sending them a Bible verse. I think it's like actually talking to them and kind of making full circle. That's where like, yeah, they can ask like ChatGPT a question, but when they walk in or message you on Instagram, again, it's like Jesus sitting down having a meal with people, you know. And I think we got to be able to have that. And I think I think there's a lot to learn from that. And I know you believe this too. It's just it's I think ministry's got to understand it's not just creating a Bible verse and putting it up on social media. It's contextualize it. And I always go back to what resonates with you, like what. And usually it's human conversations, usually getting coffee or tea with somebody. And then how can we be that more in our social presence, in our online presence, I think is important to wrestle through.
I shared a clip with you earlier of an interview that Billy Hallowell did with Lola Sheen. So Lola is the daughter of Charlie Sheen and Denise Richards. So the Gen Xers and older millennials will know who I'm talking about when I say those names. But this is a girl that grew up in the spotlight. You know, she's Hollywood, you know, the daughter of two famous actors. And she's been very vocal this past week about her experience with Jesus. And she talks about just hearing people share their testimonies, like some influences that she follows that are Christians, and just how they're talking about their faith. Anybody who watched like the Ohio State football game, you know, there's just tremendous displays from coaches to players to throughout those organizations, people giving the glory to God. You know, that's a very public conversation. Montana State, here, our local college, they, you know, they're in the FCS division of the NCAA, but they were at the national championship game. And, you know, what I love, kind of getting a local, like a behind the scenes look at that, since they're here in town. You know, that team has completely transformed in the last couple of years. Every game they kind of run out of the tunnel, you know, through the thing. And the whole team goes into the end zone on the far end of the field, takes a knee, and they pray together before
Mm,
every game.
yeah.
So it's just like these things are on display and people are watching that and they're wondering about it. And they're having some pretty honest conversations about, yeah, but what about all this other trash that I see, being done or has been done in history in the name of Jesus? So the authenticity that you're talking about, like what advice would you have for somebody that kind of feels that tension? It's like, I don't know if I want to be so vocal because of this very loud and very frankly kind of difficult conversation. What's happened with, everything from the Crusades to sex abuse in the Catholic Church, like all of that stuff kind of comes crashing down on people, or it has in the past. What would you say to people about how do I balance kind of this desire to be authentic and engage my culture or my community when I know all these other issues exist?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the harder things, and I think this is why there are, you know, they say this like they thought the internet would bring everybody together, but really it just solidified our communities, our local communities more. It's not really, the internet obviously is global, but it's actually more like it's very localized and even more. So it's like India's online culture is very tight versus US. And then within the US, there's all these subcultures. So it's like it didn't necessarily bring us together, just allowed you to connect with your people and
Are you
your
talking
tribe.
about like my feed is only stuff that
Yeah.
I'm interested in?
Yeah. Your feed is only your stuff. You know where to go to connect with your people. If I want like basketball stuff, I go to X. And if I want this, I go to Tik. And it's like, it's just, we have gamers go to Discord. We've kind of segmentized ourselves even deeper. And I think this is why one of the things is I would say to any ministry leader is understand, you are called to your generation and the people God's put on your heart. Here at MI, we talk about the idea of the persona, that you have a persona. Do not worry about the big I internet culture, the whole world. Worry about the people that God's put on your heart and talk about those issues that are important to that person. Do not worry about, I think we can't worry about pleasing everybody. I think we know that. Um, but focus in on the people you're called to and then talk about those things and be ready to engage. You do not, I think one of the things people misunderstand about being relevant is that you have to have an opinion about everything. I don't think you need to have an opinion about everything. I think you need to have opinions about the things that are important to your community.
Hmm.
And so, like, if we're hanging out, you can ask me who I voted for and how I think. But at the end of the day, you're never going to see me talk about that online because that's not important to me in what I'm doing. I might have opinions, but it's not important to my ministry.
Right.
And so now, if I was doing ministry in Washington, D.C., and there might be different things because if my group of people were Congress people and you know what I mean, like
Right.
it might be different. And so I think understand your persona, understand who you're going after, and care about those things. And then I think this is where the model of Jesus, I think this is why talking about Jesus is always an amazing bridge into these conversations. I think one of the most compelling things about following Jesus is the idea that we do have a perspective and a worldview that we can filter all these through. And I think most people are looking for a principle based way to live. I think they don't want to just go here to there. And I think this is why, like it's interesting. There's some of these states here in the United States that are uh, blocking like porn on like
Yeah.
websites.
Yeah.
Well, so one group that doesn't believe in God might think of this as like abusing kids and all these things, and they have this whole method. Why does followers of Jesus care about this? Well, we believe sexuality is best expressed in the context of marriage, and we believe this because it comes from God and what Scripture teaches. We actually have a root to this principle, and so I think, and Jesus teaches about marriage. And so I think I would go to talk about the things that are important to your community, and that's going to be different from my community. And then I would always look at the example of Jesus and come at it not like a Pharisee, but as somebody who comes to the table and helps people understand. Again, it's kind of like the last thing I'll say on this is kind of like talking to your kids. Sometimes like, especially if you have teenagers, they'll just walk in. And I remember one time my oldest, who's only 14, and this has happened recently, but he'd be like, I think I can beat up mom.
What?
And what he wasn't meant like he
I
would
want
actually,
to. He didn't say.
but he didn't say that. What he meant is he thought he was stronger than his mom.
Right.
And I was like laughing. I'm like, he is, you are not stronger. And I could come out of this two ways. I can go, let's arrange this. I want to watch your mom like put you into a, or I can be like, why do you think that? And I'm helping him because I know my role as a parent is to help him be everything he can be. Instead of me squashing him like a boss who's evil, I can help unpack what's the logic that has led him to believe this, or his logic and experience. Well, he just grew a little and
Right.
he got a little stronger. And so
Yeah.
my job is to help him be successful. And so I would say people coming into your ministry and engaging, like, don't be a boss that squashes, but help educate and bridge and ask questions. And again, I think we see Jesus' model in scripture. This is what he does.
14. Man, that's such a great age. Do you wrestle with him?
I do, yeah.
Like he can't beat you.
No.
So what do you, what
No. But so
no,
this is
but this is, I'm taking us in a totally different direction.
okay.
This is like a dad question. Because I've thought about this. Like, I want to always win against my boys.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
And it's like, especially my oldest, it's getting close to where I don't know, I might get hurt. So it's like last time we kind of tussled, and it's all in fun. But I like made sure that I put him down. I made sure that he felt it. And then I have not engaged again because I'm scared. It's like, but I want that last memory to be like, no, I still won, It's just,
Yeah.
do you think about that at all? Or
Oh,
yet?
no, I totally do. No, my son has this funny thing where he's very stubborn in a good way. I think he has he can be very principle based. Like he'll just lock in.
Yeah.
And I think I think life is going to be generally easy based off of how he functions. He just has to be in the right org and setting, I think, to kind of thrive. But one of the things is he won't tap.
Right.
He won't tap out in a wrestling match, and then I'll eventually let go, and he thinks he wins. He won.
Nice.
And I'm like, no, because I'm not gonna make you pass out.
Right.
So I have you know what I mean? But it is funny, but I remember somebody told us in our middle school ministry, they said that in middle school, that range from 12 to 14, they said the brain does the most growth since 0 to 1.
Yeah.
Like you go from concrete thinking to abstract thinking. And I see it with the 14, like he is having these thoughts, but they're not fully connected. It's like the brain hasn't fully, and I could see but yeah, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? You want me to like pass you out? No, I'm not, but it's so I do think about that. Like, should I push it a little? I'm like, no, I can't. He knows, but I don't think he knows, but that's the fun part of having a teenager.
Yeah. It's, they keep me connected to what's going on in the world too.
Yeah.
Some of the conversations that they're having at school are very, very interesting.
Oh yeah. No, kids are the most helpful to keep you relevant and aware. Cause I definitely don't, even when I listen to my music, I realize that he thinks this is classic rock, even though it's just early 2000s. And I'm like, that's funny, but it's true. Like we age and it's part of it. So kids are a super helpful tool.
For sure. So, we've talked a little bit about kind of like the public discourse around Christianity. We've talked a little bit about AI. Let's bring these two ideas together, because I know that a lot of ministries, and MII does a ton of work with digital ministries, and follow-up is always the constraint. And you're a big online groups guy, getting people, into conversation eventually, in person, but happens remotely at first. Tell me about your thoughts on the use of AI, and that could be as simple as chatbots, but how do we, are there any good tools for kind of providing some of that initial response, or does that kind of defeat the purpose? If somebody's reaching out with a question, they want to go deeper than whatever, you posted on your website or whatever video they watched. Is it disingenuous to kick them to a automated tool?
I don't think it's wrong to do that. I do think we're getting to the era where we have to educate them that they are interacting with AI on some level. And I think most of these tools do this on purpose already. But I think people do feel, at least at this stage, they feel tricked if they're not educated that they are interacting with some kind of AI content. I have found that it's interesting. One of the ways, and I think most people that are in this space and use AI, what ChatGPT and all these tools are really good at is asking it iterative questions. So, for example, like I might think of a follow-up conversation one way and how I might respond. What's really nice is to be able to throw like, this is how I respond to this question about Jesus, and to ask ChatGPT, what are 3 other ways to answer this? Or
Okay.
how would I answer this if they were an unbeliever and they were 17 years old? And almost like it's almost like a friend sitting there, and you're just like bouncing ideas off. And I would
Like a
say
coach.
a coach, yeah. And so like I think if you're doing follow-up, I think that's one of the things is just like, or like if you're creating a like I business ad manager started doing this on Meta's platform, where you'll put in an ad, you'll create an ad, it will iterate on the title and the text. And I think it's 80% there, but I find those ideas as interesting sparks, because I think, I've been walking with Jesus for 20 plus years. To think that I can relate to somebody who doesn't know Jesus, like I'm very distant from that. I'm very much in my own bubble. And I think you can frame ads or conversations, and you can say, hey, what are 3 other ways to think about this? And you can prompt it to say, hey, what's a way I can say this that might relate to somebody who's 15 years old and doesn't know Jesus, or maybe somebody who's 28-year old, and it will give you really interesting words and phrases, especially in messages and, in ad strategies and content related. It's all about keywords and sparks. And so I think that's one of the most effective ways that I use it day to day. Like I'll write an email and I say, can you say this in a gentle way? Or what's a creative way? Or how would you say this if you're talking to somebody who's newly married? Those are the ways that I would really recommend using it now in a very effective way and in a daily kind of way.
That's good. I like that. Good tips. Well, Jay, it's always fun to talk to you. Thanks for being back on the pod. You're a regular. Our podcasting career goes way back.
It does. It
You
does. Yeah. What we got to do, like, if you're watching this or listening to this on YouTube, you got to drop a comment of something we got to talk about the next time we meet. So
yeah, for sure. That'd be good.
Drop that.
Otherwise we're just going to talk about whatever
whatever we want.
Yeah. It'll be, cars or something. Thanks. Hope you have a great time exploring all of these AI tools as they develop. Let me know what you're learning, what you're finding out.
Of course. And you survive your storm that's coming here.
Oh man, I'm gonna try to go play in the snow this weekend. We'll see what happens. All right, buddy. We'll talk to you later.
Yep.